Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening.
Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World with our regular series on Star Trek. We cover every season when it's over, and I have my regular bridge crew, but I also have a special guest red shirt today, Ryan Downey, representing. But we'll introduce everybody in case this is your first time. I know there's a lot of people that are watching Strange New Worlds that haven't watched a lot of the other series, so this may be your first time. I'm David Agranoff. I am the host of this here podcast. I am a author and amateur science fiction historian. But I do another podcast called Dickheads, which is devoted to the work of Philip K. Dick. And that's where I kind of get my interest in this. I've been a lifelong Star Trek fan. Ryan knows this better than anybody because he's known me the longest, but yeah, into Star Trek for a long time. Joining me today, Sara Lynn Michener is one of the most active and vocal Star Trek fans I know. One of the queens of Star Trek shit posting. Really vocal and active member. Sara, tell the folks who you are and what your history with Star Trek is.
Well, I was raised by conservatives, so Star Trek was my third and best parent. And I was homeschooled, so I used to watch Star Trek when it was on the UPN network. Like 6 hours a day. And I was 8 years old when TNG premiered, and I was just like gaga over it from the beginning. And it sort of represented everything that my upbringing was denying me. So I just needed it directly into my veins. Been a huge fan ever since.
Issa, now, folks who have watched our shows before know you and Sara, but you're a longtime Star Trek fan as well. What's your history with Star Trek?
So I grew up watching the original series on reruns. I was in high school when Next Generation came out, and that is my favorite Star Trek. It just kind of is exactly what I want from Star Trek. I've also really enjoyed pretty much every other season show. Yeah, I did not prepare remarks in advance, but I'll try to do better in the future on the fly here.
Right. Well, we might need a little bit more of an introduction for Mr. Ryan J. Downey, who, by the way, is a very old friend of ours from the hardcore scene. But Ryan is very well versed. He does 2 podcasts himself, including Speak and Destroy, the Metallica podcast. And he is a bona fide rock and film journalist. He's the one of us who has actually met the guy that plays Captain Kirk in this season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Ryan, tell the folks who you are, what you do.
Well, as a Metallica podcast host, I'm well versed in defending later eras of things that older fans don't like, which happens with any fandom. Anytime anything new comes out, the thing that everyone hated last time now becomes the classic thing. In fact, for anyone who cares or knows about Metallica that can relate to this, I've had guests on in the last year or two.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Who will say things like, my first Metallica album was Death Magnetic. My first Metallica album was Saint Anger. Yeah, so it's wild.
Weren't even born when records we consider to be old Metallica, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I had someone our age refer to the Black Album as new Metallica recently, and I was like, they just did the 30th anniversary for that record, right? Like literally the 30th anniversary has already passed.
It came out like 5 years ago in 1990, I think.
Yeah. So and I think there's a nice parallel here with Trek or any kind of fandom where the thing everyone used to be mad about becomes the classic that's now sanctified. Because I also, I know people in their early 40s who straight up don't believe me when I tell them a lot of fans didn't like the Black Album. let alone just won't even listen to you if you say a lot of fans didn't like And Justice for All. So, you know,
much like the introduction of Star Trek: The Next Generation, when
Exactly.
people were up in arms.
Exactly.
Like, who are these people? I hate this crew. Why are they wearing pajamas? Whatever, you
Yeah.
know.
So yeah, there's a nice parallel, as you just pointed out, with being involved in different fandoms. Yeah, my Trek bona fides, as it were, I grew up watching the original series in syndication. You know, not so old that it was still currently airing, but it was on TV a lot, on, you know, local channels and
Channel
stuff like
4.
that. Channel 4 in Indiana.
5 o'clock every day. We watch the same.
Exactly. We watched the same syndicated.
Yeah, I didn't realize it
TOS.
was still on network TV. I watched it on like the UHF stations in DC. Like,
But no, Channel 4 was the independent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and it was also on the weekends sometimes, and there'd be marathons. So I was really into that, and I was into it enough that I remember when the Next Gen was starting. I want to say Dave and I were in middle school.
Yeah,
we
were.
That time. And I remember watching Encounter at Farpoint, and I remember I think it's right before the first commercial break when Q shows up, and he's very like fanciful, and I don't know, he's wearing like a Shakespeare outfit or something. And I just remember in that moment being like, "Yep, this feels like Star Trek in all of the good ways and bad." Already in 7th grade, you know, like
Right.
wow, this pilot's already given me exactly what I wanted and exactly what I don't want, but also want. So yeah, TOS is still the one for me. I love Next Generation. Dave and I have had this conversation many times about the difference between best and favorites. I think TOS is probably the best, but Deep Space Nine is my favorite. I could easily be persuaded that it's the opposite, that Deep Space Nine is the best and TOS is my favorite. But and then my blind spots, as it were, is I never watched all of Voyager consistently. I popped in and out of it as it was airing and never went back. Similar experience with Enterprise. And other than that, you know, I want to say going back to Wrath of Khan, I've seen every Trek theatrical release in the theater when it was like first run, you know, and for some reason there was an era.
I've never missed an opping day for a Star Trek movie
Opening day,
motion picture on.
I can't claim opening day, and I also can't claim motion picture, but I can claim Wrath of Khan forward. And there was a weird era, I want to say end of high school or just after. I used to an ex-girlfriend of mine who Dave knows, named Tiffany, used to work at the Greenwood Park Mall. And I would, when she would go to work at the Greenwood Park Mall, I would go to the $1.50 movie theater and just see movies by myself endlessly. And I watched, I want to say, of course, I'm on a Star Trek podcast blanking on the name. It's the one that's like the Cold War era.
Undiscovered Country.
Undiscovered Country. I watched that probably 6 times over the course of a few weeks, not because I was like, this is so great, but it was playing at the $1.50 theater and I liked it enough. You know, and I'd already seen JFK, and I have all these like random movies, Universal Soldier, that like I saw during that like distinct 1-year period because it was always $1.50 and I always had nothing to do. And I would just wait for my girlfriend to finish her 8-hour shift at the mall and would just go to like 3 movies at a time.
Well, that explains a lot, actually.
It does, especially about a certain era of pop culture. But yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into it here. You know, being the red on the podcast, I should say, not a fan of Picard. I don't know how that goes over here, if that's a popular or unpopular opinion.
Sarah tried very hard to get Issa and I to like season 2 much more than we did initially. So
I appreciate.
I did my due diligence.
Yeah, I gotta say, not a fan of any of the Picard so far.
Well, I do like season 1 much more. But now, Ryan, one of the reasons I knew that you weren't a big fan of Picard, and one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on here was because, you know, you sent me messages basically telling me how stoked you were on Strange New Worlds from the beginning. And, you know, I knew you bring a good perspective to it as being somebody who is very, very devoted to TOS over the years. And so when we get into it, that is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here in the revolving red shirt chair. for this season. Another person who was invited, who's a little under the weather, is our friend Dan O'Mahony, who just wanted me to make sure that we talked about Anson Mount's hair, and I told him there was no way we could not talk about Anson Mount's hair at some point, so we will get there. I want to get.
I have a Morrissey tattoo. There was no way I wasn't going to talk about Anson Mount's hair.
Right. So, quick thoughts on the idea of returning to Pike, and I love the idea that this is the longest. They make the joke that this is the longest pilot to TV series call in the history of television. However, the crew is very different from The Cage, so let's be honest, it's a little different. But for the most part, I love the idea. From the very beginning, the idea of going back, I'm not a huge prequel guy, but the idea of getting Pike's backstory, once, for me, as soon as I saw that Ethan Peck was nailing Spock in Discovery, I was okay with it. Because that was the hardest thing for me, was if you can nail Spock, and I personally think Ethan Peck is better than Zachary Quinto as Spock. I think and one of the things you can tell from Ethan Peck, and it's been proven in interviews, is that he is an actual Star Trek fan. And he is the one who a lot of times will explain to the other actors the importance of things. They've talked about how Ethan Peck is the one that will say, no, this is very important because, yeah.
You can't just go making him hotter like that. God.
I know. And the fact that he's
I grew up having a crush on his grandfather, and I grew up having a crush on Nimoy's Spock. Therefore, this is some kind of
quite a combination.
All live in a simulation that's been created just for me.
Right. So starting with Sarah, how did you feel about the concept of Strange New Worlds, like as going back to doing a Pike prequel?
I think it's great because I've always loved Pike's character. I loved him in the Kelvin movies. I loved The Cage so much more than I've loved much of TOS, like just because of the Pike character. Like when I remember when I watched the movies first, the TOS movies first, because, obviously because of, I'm only 43. And I remember watching the one with the whales when I was like 7, 8 years old and loving it. And so I ultimately went back and watched the TOS episodes at some point, I think when I was homeschooled, because that's when I had a lot of time. And when I saw The Cage, I was like, what the fuck? Why did they pick Shatner when they had this guy who is a much better actor and is much more attractive? And I was just very confused. I was just like, why? So for me, this feels like righting a wrong that was in choosing Shatner back in 1965 or 66. So, it's and I realize that people will be angry with me for saying that, but I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I'll defend Shatner a little bit later, but yeah. When we talk about how bad Paul Wesley is casting, but we'll get there. So, I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I mean that's pretty much all I had to say about that. Like I really love the Pike character. I think that he's distinctly a good character, and the fact that he's a huge bright spot. I mean, the Kelvin movies in general, the biggest strong suit that they all have is exceptional casting. Like whoever had that assignment nailed it, absolutely nailed it. And so it's just sort of, for me, it was sort of like one of those, I'm honestly surprised that we haven't had a Pike series up until now, like that it took this long.
Well, it was Akiva Goldman's goal from the minute he stepped into Discovery, knowing that it was 10 years earlier. I guess his very first meeting was, we got to do Pike, right? We got to do Pike. And so a lot of people give Akiva Goldman credit for that. From the beginning as being the one that was really like pushing that. Issa, how did you feel about going back to pre-Kirk era Enterprise?
So, okay, bear with me here. I'll get to there. This is kind of roundabout, but I generally feel as an amateur storyteller and appreciation of stories being told that prequels suck. like just as a general, I'm willing to say it across the board. If you have a good story, I want to see it go forward. I don't ever care about it going backwards. I'm not saying that there have never been good prequels ever, but I am saying that, when you're starting a story, if it's the first thing of a story, you want to start as late in the plot as possible, just because it makes things better. That's like a basic rule of storytelling. You compress time a little. Anything that can be backstory should just be backstory. You don't have to show it. With that being said, I loved Strange New Worlds and it really worked. And it will probably from now on be my like one example of a good way to do a prequel. I think they're getting into interesting territory by bringing Kirk on board because he's such a well-known character. I think we already covered that Spock is being done really well and they pulled that off, which is very impressive. But Pike and the rest of the crew is unknown enough that they can pretty much be fleshed out as new characters. It's really tough with a Kirk, and so we'll see how that. And for me, I kind of wish they'd picked a no-name actor because I know Paul Wesley as Stephen Salvatore or Stefan Salvatore, and that is what he will always be on the screen. So I'm expecting him to be a vampire, and it's very distracting. At least in the first episode. I'm sure I'll get used to it eventually. But yeah,
so Ryan, you were wrong. You're not the only one that's watched the Vampire Diaries.
Yeah,
I love the Vampire Diaries. Was great.
I predicted I would be the lone Vampire Diaries aficionado on the.
Well, I will say this in the theme of like beginnings and endings. I've never finished the series. I've watched the first maybe 5 or 6 seasons twice, but I always kind of trail off and never manage to finish it. And it's been so long that I probably would have to start over if I were to watch it again. It didn't even get bad. I just get distracted. I don't even know what it is.
You know what? We're in almost exactly the same boat because I never finished it either, and I got really far and rewatched the first 3, I think, multiple times. I mean, and the same with the originals. I never finished the originals, although I liked it a lot.
But right there with you on the original.
Somehow
liked it, never finished it.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure show in so much as not to say that those shows are bad. They're great, but they're not. When there's prestige television filling your queue, it's harder to justify those moments of
absolutely
going and watching the originals.
It's my Buffy the Vampire Slayer was my all-time favorite show, and it's sort of like when that ended, I watched Charmed just because it filled the space, but not really. And Vampire Diaries is a continuation of that tradition where it's not as good, but it's pretty good. So
and the originals was a continuation of the Angel tradition, where it was the spinoff was better in some ways, but didn't have the same sort of charm as the original. And I never watched what's the one that just got canceled? Legacy. Yeah, I never saw
I haven't watched that. We are right on the same page. We'll have to get together and watch like the last couple seasons.
I did see that they contrived a Klaus cameo in the series finale of that show. I say that because I assume, like me, you're probably never going to watch that show.
I'm unfollowable. My wife has finished it. I don't care at this point.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
So
Vampire Diaries.
Okay, sorry, but it'll be interesting seeing how
different podcast.
It'll be interesting to see how he steps into the role of Kirk. I won't count the first episode against him because you're still getting used to it. But will I see him as Kirk going forward, or will he still be Stefan Salvatore, the vampire?
Well, and I don't know if we're gonna get him again because they kind of tricked us into saying that he'd be in season 2 to maintain the secrecy that he was going to be in the finale of season 1. So
now I might have misunderstood this, but I thought that he was always going to be in the finale and in season 2, and that they let the season 2 thing loose because they knew that there were paparazzi pictures that were about to expose that, like they were trying to keep him a secret altogether. Right?
Yeah, I think that they were saying that he's in season 2 to keep the secret from season 1. I got the impression, but yeah.
But I don't know if that means he's not going to be in season 2.
That's true. He might be, and I think eventually we'll get a passing of the baton at the end of the series, probably.
And you can't cast his brother as a crew member and have him show up in the universe and we know he's somewhere and then not eventually have him be part of the show. It seems like it's
and we know his brother is going to die in TOS, but which is a thing. But anyways, so Issa, did you have anything else on just the general concept of it?
No, I like, honestly, on paper I would never have thought it was a good idea, but it totally works.
Yeah. Ryan?
I'm in a similar spot to Issa as well when it comes to prequels, generally speaking, and I would imagine we all are to some degree. I don't hate the concept outright, but it's funny because this idea I'm about to present is something that I actually first heard from Julie Plec, the co-creator and showrunner of the Vampire Diaries and the extended Vampire Diaries universe, which is that you should only do a flashback in an episodic storytelling if the flashback is going to tell you something about what's happening currently and what's about to happen. But this is the only reason for those to exist. And once I heard that, it's explained a lot for me about a lot of things storytelling wise. And I think that, prequels, generally speaking, fit into that category. Like, I think a example of when a prequel doesn't justify itself, right, would be the Solo movie. Right. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's
but
fine.
How else would we know how he got the name Han Solo?
And that's exactly where I'm going, right? Like we didn't need to know, like, oh, the movie tells us how he got his gun and how he got his name and how he met Chewbacca. And it was a lot of things that we ultimately didn't need to know. It didn't really add anything to what exists before. It didn't necessarily detract. It just sort of was. And then we go on down the list of things that maybe hurt the original story and its relationship to the original story, and things that actually really helped it. I do think what's being done in the Star Wars universe right now is instructive in so much as the way that they're finding different pockets of untold stories in the timeline where there's these huge gaps. I think that that's more appropriate, and you're able to kind of build out side characters. And I think Better Call Saul is a great example of something that is
adds
100% justified itself. It's added a lot of depth. It's played in that universe, and so we get to have things that are familiar and so on. But it took what was essentially a side supporting character from the main thing, and branched off into its own story.
And that's just it. Is that this show isn't?
And that's where I'm going. That's what this That's what this show has done by taking Pike, who's somebody that we didn't get to know all that well over the course of the mythology, and centering the show around him. Now, it is interesting the way they've really painted themselves in the corner by giving the character the same foreknowledge of his fate that the audience has. By the same turn, as much as we know there's that inevitability, it also gives them some freedom, because we're not constantly watching the episodes as the audience thinking like, oh, if only he knew what's going to happen to him. Well, no, he does know what's going to happen to him, and he's actually making decisions and stuff based on that, having that same foreknowledge that we have. So I think that they figured out a really inventive way into it. It's really charming. It's really interesting. It takes some great visual cues, I think, from the Abrams films, but also from the original. I mean, it reminds me very much of the way that when they reimagined Battlestar, right? They didn't say, okay, the original Battlestar Galactica tried to imagine what futuristic tech would look like. What does futuristic tech look like now? Instead, they did this retro future thing, which I think is part of what really ground the show in such realism. And I see that much like a Rogue One or a Kenobi, this show's very effectively doing the same thing, where it's like, okay, we're not going to do things that would just be embarrassing by modern standards, but we're also not going to update it so much that it feels totally disconnected from the original series. I like that it's very smart about balancing, what audiences expect from genre filmmaking today, and the connections we needed to have. The last thing I'll say is that about the prequel thing in general, it seems that, like a Better Call Saul, that doing it over a television series where you have multiple ongoing episodes is a lot better than trying to condense a prequel type story into a 2-hour film. Obviously, you could make the argument. There's a fan edit of the Kenobi series going around right now that's a 2.5-hour version of the 6 hours of episodes, and there's definitely a persuasive argument to be made for trimming the fat from that show, and sometimes they're stretching it into a show. But I think in these instances where they're not, it doesn't feel like it's just getting us from point A to point B. It really feels like it's a setting, a landscape for them to play in. And it's not so one beat after another doesn't have to be like, oh, that's how this happened, and oh, that's where that came from, and oh, that's how these two met. I think it really benefits from that. So yeah, I was very excited by the concept. Having been very disappointed with Picard, I had a feeling that just this concept in general would be more likely to pull me in. And I know I said that was the last thing I was going to say, but I want to say this too, because it's just something I learned recently. Apparently, those of us who deal with depression and anxiety enjoy rewatching the same shows for like some psychological reason. There's some new study that came out about that. And when I read it, it rang very familiar. As someone who's been through The Sopranos 5 times and has, been through even shows that I didn't necessarily love. Like I've watched Sons of Anarchy a bunch of times. I wouldn't even say that it's a good show. And yet I've continued to go back to it. And there is something psychological, I guess, about having the foreknowledge of where it's going to go. And I guess maybe you don't have the anxiety of surprise or danger, and you can just sort of enjoy the story. By that same turn, I get more excited, I think, about something like Strange New Worlds, knowing that there's only so much that can screw up, whereas something like Picard has every opportunity to take something that was great that we loved and kind of destroy it. And
interesting. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. We have money now in Star Trek. Cool.
I want to jump in with something to riff off of what Ryan just said about the foreknowledge of what's going to happen to Pike. I think one of the most important things about prequels, and whether I like them or not, is if they follow the rules of the universe. And I think the season of Strange New Worlds did a really good job of setting the rules where this is his fate and it can't be changed. Like it took them all season to do it, but we know his fate and we know it can't be changed. And now it's interesting watching him come to grips with that, but it won't be like, how can I change this? How can I change that?
Well, and it plays a really cool role in the whole Star Trek thing and justifying the prequel in a couple ways. For one, it basically canonizes how important Kirk and Spock are, right? That their role. And I thought in this last episode, when the Farragut was destroyed, I thought Kirk was dead. That's what I thought they were going to do, is like Kirk's dead. And none of the, there's nobody to save the whales, like right?
Back to the whales.
Yeah, I mean, but you think of all the things that they've done, and I know they're making the argument that Navarre and the uniting of Romulus and Vulcan is a huge part of, what Spock has to do, like save the galaxy type stuff. He needs to make that huge alliance. That's a huge part of it. But at the same, so I think in a way, Strange New World almost canonizes why this episode canonizes why Kirk and Spock are so important, that they play such a huge role in what happens in the universe. That's one thing. And two, I love the relationship between Kirk and Spock, like going back. And it always bothered me watching the menagerie that I was like, yo, dude, that Kirk's your boy. Why are you sacrificing everything for Pike? Right. And in that episode, he says that he served with Pike for 11 years, which is longer. Right. But that moment, that scene in the finale, when Pike tells Spock how important he is to him, and Spock tells him how important he is to him, not only did it get me teary-eyed and a little choked up, but it made the menagerie better. And that's something that a prequel has to do. And, say what you will about the Star Wars prequels, but Downey and I have talked about this. I think the prequels serve at least the role of making, like when I was a kid, I could never believe that Luke believed that Vader could be turned, right? I was like, what are you smoking? He's Darth Vader. He can't be turned. But what the prequels did was give me like depth into that.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I know we're talking about Star Trek here, but the prequels really ruined the original trilogy of Star Wars. They made it so much sillier.
I'm just saying.
Dude, I'm just saying, like balance of whatever. You had Yoda fight the Emperor. They almost win. He just barely loses, gets banished, and then instead of coming back and fighting him again after he almost beat him, he's like, no, we're gonna let some kids grow up and do the fight for us. That was like the dumbest thing.
All right. Well, but to stick with Star Trek, I think what this smartly did was give so much more weight to Pike and Spock's relationship.
Absolutely.
When that was...
Unlike the Star Wars prequels, this was actually really good.
And I think also, to your point and to my earlier point, that the Julian Pleck bit of wisdom, I think going forward, that relationship between just in the context of the menagerie, it's very instructive about what the relationship between Kirk and Spock will become, because it's almost like it's sort of saying, look, these are the links I would go to for this captain that I served with for 11 years. And at some point, you and I are going to have a relationship that's going, I'm this loyal, like I'm this, I can have this much affection despite my seemingly emotionless demeanor. Here's my one sentence on the Star Wars prequels. One sentence.
Impossible.
The prequel trilogy are good ideas executed poorly. The sequel trilogy are bad ideas executed well. The end. I just did Star Wars.
I think that was, I don't know if that counted as a semicolon or two sentences.
Semicolon, yeah.
But I will allow that because that's really accurate.
Now I'm noticing here, because the three of us grew up watching TOS first, and Sarah didn't. Sarah came to TOS later. So Sarah, I'm interested in your relationship to, like, because it was really important for us to see a little bit of this backstory and get that TOS vibe. Like, how did you feel about going back to the TOS vibe, even though, because it wasn't your favorite, it wasn't what you grew up on. You grew up on TNG, right?
Well, technically I grew up on TOS movies. And I saw those first. I saw those before I saw TNG. And so I would say that I like it. I like the camp. And I've been introducing a friend of mine who tried watching Star Trek once. He watched TNG. He found it unbearably campy, and dated, and which broke my heart, absolutely broke my heart. And he couldn't watch it. And so I was like, okay, so I need to get this kid onto Star Trek. He's 10 years younger than me. And I was like, I feel like Strange New Worlds is the correct thing to introduce him to, because it's brand spanking new, it's fresh. But I told him, I said, it's still campy, but it's intentional. And that's the thing. Like, it's not sort of super, it wasn't important to me. It's just something that I knew they would do. I think that they made a couple of decisions in Strange New Worlds where they valued the camp over believability, over a good story. Little details like the fact that the Vulcan women are wearing entirely too much makeup and they look ridiculous, and I could not take them seriously as Vulcans. To Pring and all of these characters, and I know why they did that. They did that because they were trying to reference the crazy 60s makeup on the Vulcans and TOS. But which is more important, guys? Are you just masturbating over here to the TOS look and feel, or do you want to create something new and believable? And by contrast, like the Vulcans in Discovery are so much more Vulcan-like. They're so much more distinguished and serious and believable as Vulcans. And the Vulcans in Strange New Worlds are like, Kim Kardashian. And it's very disappointing. So little things like that, where they value the camp and they value the nostalgia factor, and they're unfortunately going a little too far with it, and they're valuing it above things that are more important to good storytelling. So stuff like that, definitely. And I feel like it helps, that I wasn't completely in love with TOS as my original. That said, I love TNG. TNG is the one that I grew up with the most, the one that I bonded with, if you will, the most as a child. And I love Picard. So I feel like, it kind of depends on the person and what you saw in the original, whatever it was, whether it was TNG or TOS or whatever. And therefore that changes what your expectations are for what you want from whatever they're remaking or backfilling or whatever.
Yeah. I will say, and not that I'm disagreeing with you at all, but just as a slight counterpoint, or maybe how there's a lot of different tones happening in Strange New Worlds. I love that they are making an effort to make the Gorn scary, possibly the least scary, campiest alien adversary from TOS.
They were the flea stack, you know.
That was the flea stack, and then all of a sudden, this show's making them like, xenomorphs, exactly.
And they could have done that. They
Right
could have made the same mistake. They could have said, you know what? Let's have a guy in a lizard suit.
Right.
It would be a funny callback. And it's like, no, you have to remember you're making a new show for people like my friend who have never seen any Star Trek, except for the Star Trek they saw that they dismissed because it was too dated and too campy. And he is slowly becoming a Star Trek fan. Nice. In fact, I even got him to watch The Balance of Terror after the finale because he has COVID right now. And I was like, so you have a lot of time right now. I have a suggestion.
Right.
And he did it. He watched it. So I was like, yes.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, Strange New Worlds is my favorite Star Trek since Deep Space Nine, which is saying something. I love the shit out of it. I love almost every stinking minute. I think even when it makes mistakes, I'm fine with it because a lot of times they're making mistakes with good intentions. And but I don't think it's perfect. I saw no reason for La'an to be a Noonien Singh and I still think that that's really pushing it. I really hate that. I will live with it. I will.
Or as I like to call her, Lieutenant Hitler.
Yeah. She's really tight. Well, that's why I think.
Well, I mean, it's just so silly to saddle a character with such a loaded name, but not only for the audience, but also within universe, right? Like, that she would happen to be related to
that.
Like,
she would basically be named Lieutenant Hitler. Yeah.
I think we should reflect for a moment that it's, we're talking about the show, and I know it had like some like sneak pilots, like some backdoor piloting in Discovery, but for a first season of a Star Trek show
it's incredible.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's only going to get better from here, if history is any guide. And so
they made this early in COVID before vaccines, and that's so there is a lot of things that were kind of minuses to the show that were real world examples of the fact that, for example, how certain characters would drop out of the show, for like number one drops out of the show for huge periods of time, when Rebecca Romaine was not available because she hadn't gone back through quarantine, for example, and had to film out of order for her scenes from episodes. For example, the fact that the cast and crew could only have so much interaction, so they made this under a really, really intense COVID situation where the second season probably isn't going to have that. So I expect season 2 to be a little bit looser in that regard. And they did a good job of hiding it, because unless you're looking for those things, you're probably not going to notice them for the most part,
Super impressive.
Yeah. So that is impressive. And I like that they updated the ship and the look, and listen, I had, just when I put a call out for questions on this one, like, I had somebody say, explain the difference and why the ship's bigger. And I'm just like, come on, people, use your imagination. It's okay for the Klingons and Gorns to look a little different. Just, if you're not watching the original series and updating the tech in your own mind, you're watching it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always go back to, and Ryan probably remembers this, but right around the time Phantom Menace came out, they interviewed Ozzy on the red carpet for the world premiere of Phantom Menace, and Ozzy was so confused that he's like, "Why is the technology better?" And it's like, don't be Ozzy here. Don't. I mean, I love the guy, but don't be Ozzy on this. Like, Klingons can look different. They're a big species. There can be different looking Klingons too. And I think Enterprise did a dumb thing to try and explain the no ridges thing.
I mean, I think Deep Space Nine had already handled it perfectly. When Worf was just like that. We don't talk about that. That's all we ever needed.
That's all we ever needed. Right. So let's talk about the cast. your favorites on the cast. Obviously, we're all gonna gush about Handsome Mount and Ethan Peck. Like, my goodness, like they're both great. Like, I love that the show figured out from the beginning, knew from the beginning that Spock has always been the sex symbol of the show. So, and I have a friend through podcasting, Jacob Hall, who writes for Slash Film and does a really great Star Trek podcast. I want to shout out, Trekking Through Time and Space, where he's teaching a Doctor Who fan Star Trek and she's teaching him Doctor Who. It's a really good podcast. And
that's a great concept too.
Yeah, great concept. And Jacob got to interview Akiva Goldsman and really drilled down on Spock as a sex symbol. And Akiva Goldsman said that they literally had a meeting where they're like, how much can we get Spock's shirt off? And they literally said that, according to Akiva Goldsman. And so
much
I think
appreciated.
Yeah. They knew that Ethan, well, yeah, they knew what they had, right? And look, he was covered under a beard through a lot of Discovery, right? So, you know, we didn't get to see him as like kind of normal Spock until the short treks.
Oh,
So
the
now-
last episode.
Yeah.
Are you trying to tell Issa and I we need to shave? Is that what that was?
No. I'm not saying that. But so starting with Sarah, who are your standouts in the cast, and how did you think they did on casting?
I think they did great. I I really enjoy Uhura. I'm really glad that little things like, you know, they were gonna make her wear a wig and she was like, no. And they were like, okay, we'll just have her have short hair. It's cool. I really appreciate that, especially considering, you know, that they did other aesthetic changes or decisions that I didn't like. But yeah, I can't really complain about any of them other than, of course, Kirk. Like, I haven't actually seen the Vampire Diaries, and so to me this man was an unknown actor, and I was just like, this man has zero Kirk energy. I don't understand. Like, I appreciate
No
even the fact
swag.
that I can appreciate the fact that, like, I'm not one of those people who insists that, oh well, you know, this character had long hair and was white, and so therefore they always have to have long hair and be white. Like, fuck that. I hate that shit. So I can even appreciate the fact that they chose a Kirk who was even physically very different than the Kirks that we have known. He's, you know, he doesn't have blonde hair. He doesn't have sparkling blue eyes. And so it's just sort of like, but he has to be Kirk in some other way. And it's like, I can't find it anywhere. There's 0% Kirk in this man. And I'm just like, so I'm trying to figure out what they're thinking with that. But otherwise, you know, I really love all the cast.
Now, that's one of the few dings I have on the whole season, was that I did not buy him as Kirk. He did not have the swagger. That's fine. I still love the episode. I was just like, okay, that wasn't great. That wasn't perfect.
He's a
Moving
good
on.
actor. Like if they had just named him somebody else, I would have liked the character and I would have been like, okay, cool, I get it. I buy it. But because he's trying to be Kirk, I was just like almost confused. I was just like, I don't understand why they made this decision. Like, did somebody lose a bet?
But I have to say, he's a fine actor. I mean, on the
Yeah,
Vampire Diaries,
He's a good actor.
his
I don't want to be
main
mean.
character, he plays like a stereotypical brooding vampire, and which is, you know, about as different from a Captain Kirk as you could imagine. So I'm sort of trying to wonder how they even came up with the idea to cast him. It does seem like a very strange decision. But I will say there's some times on the show where he plays other characters and he does a good job. Like, he's definitely, his acting chops are there.
He's a good actor. Yeah.
So it's weird, but you
It's
would
not
have
his
expected,
fault necessarily.
I mean, but you would have expected at least some sort of verbal nod to Captain Kirk of some sort. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was none of that. It was really, that was surprising.
Yeah. And, I'm just going to put this out there. Shatner and Nimoy are both super Jewish, and you know, maybe somebody from the tribe. I don't know. Like, but I'm just mostly kidding. But I always love the fact that most people don't realize that Shatner is Jewish at all.
Oh, I think everyone knows from the Adam Sandler Hanukkah song.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I think someone else who's enjoyed people not knowing Shatner's Jewish is Shatner. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
True. Yeah. All right. So, but as far as the cast goes, for me personally, the Paul Wesley just didn't have the swagger for Kirk for me, but that's okay. But I thought the rest of the casting was all pretty awesome. Like, it's really will make you feel old when you see how Uhura's the actor who plays Uhura was born in this century. It's very hard, yeah, to deal with that. I think the casting is great. There's sometimes I'm not as in love with Nurse Chapel as everyone else seems to be. She's great. She's fine. She's almost a little too capable sometimes.
I'm glad to hear some nitpicks because I'm gonna probably bum everyone out because go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So that's the only thing I have with her. But I do think her scenes with Spock have been very good, and I like that they're not making her just unrequited thing with Spock be her whole character, which is good. And I do know Kiva Goldsman has also hinted, because there's an episode, What Little Girls Are Made Of, where we meet Chapel's fiance, and he said when they asked if we were going to meet Roger Kirby is he said, "Stay tuned." So we probably going to get a story involving, because he's an advanced artificial being person, so that could be some interesting storylines. So that's good. So Issa, how did you feel about the cast in general?
I mean, I'm just shocked that you don't care for Nurse Chapel. I think she's fantastic.
I like her. I don't like her as much as people seem to be falling absolutely like with their tongues on the floor in love with her. And I don't feel that way. That's what I'm saying.
I
like her. She's great.
Right. I would say the cast is perfect. Honestly, like I can't think of a character who doesn't work very well. Yeah, I whoever did the casting did a great job. I don't see any, aside from the Kirk discussion that we just had, where I got to do my hint of a Shatner impression. I don't. In
my defense, I loved Hemmer as much as most people.
Yeah, that we'll get. I assume we'll get to that, but that was one of the things that I didn't really care for about the towards the end of the show. All the characters are fantastic. Their interactions are fantastic. They have a really good, for the first season, they have a really good vibe together. Everything works really well. I literally can't think of something to change.
Ryan, cast.
So I think we have a consensus, generally speaking, and that we all love the casting and think that it's excellent. I mean, it's arguably the best cast Star Trek series since Deep Space Nine, maybe. I mean, it's fantastic. I have two areas of disagreement with everyone, I think. One is Kirk, which we'll get to. It's a little unfair, I think, to really evaluate Paul Wesley's Kirk right now, given that it's such a truncated performance relative to, we've got to spend a season with all these other actors in these roles. And he's dealing with the weight and responsibility of playing arguably the most, if not one of the two most known characters from this series in pop culture. I mean, people know William Shatner as Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock, who've never seen a minute of any Trek of any medium. So having said that, it's a huge responsibility. I always felt that while he was great on the Vampire Diaries, I was always hopeful that he would have an opportunity to do something more widely seen, more noteworthy, because from the very beginning, to me, it's funny how we're talking about his lack of swagger, because I think he has a total James Dean thing going that I think was probably a large part of why he was cast. I think that they intentionally didn't go for someone who was Shatner-esque in a lot of ways, because, if he was doing the halted delivery, it becomes an impression, right? Like there's performances and there's impressions. And it's like, is the job of this actor to play Captain Kirk, the character, or is it to play William Shatner playing Captain Kirk? And of course, it's almost impossible to separate, because we associate the actor and the role so much. And while there was TJ Hooker and there was Boston Legal, which I actually really enjoyed, Shatner is Kirk. You know, it's not like he's Harrison Ford's Han Solo, but he's also.
I didn't hate Chris Pine though. I didn't hate Chris Pine.
I didn't hate Chris Pine either. Yeah,
amazing.
Chris Pine was great. But also, it's interesting the benefit of hindsight, right? Because we also got 3 movies with Chris Pine, and we've gotten a handful of scenes with Paul Wesley, and it's on television and not in a big film. I'll draw another Star Wars parallel in that Kathleen Kennedy said this thing that was talked about a lot recently, where she was like, the lesson that we learned from the Solo movie is that we shouldn't recast legacy characters. Like, no one wants to see someone other than Harrison Ford playing Han Solo.
I think that is
but let me finish the thought though. What struck me about it as the funniest is she said that, and she was also talking about Luke and why they've chosen to do the deep fake de-aging thing with Mark Hamill. Is she says that, and then she's like, now let me present to you Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, starring Tamara Morrison as Boba Fett, someone who was newly recast in that role, starring Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen, and like all of these people who were actually new actors playing legacy characters, but it's thought of differently because the prequels were 15 years ago. So we don't think of Ewan McGregor as a new Kenobi playing an old role. And so I think Chris Pine has some of that same benefit, right? Where if we were talking about Chris Pine as Kirk,
Glover as Lando, because he fucking nailed it, right?
But I would also argue he didn't rise above impersonation. I feel like he was doing a rich little, what a comedian does when they do an impersonation and they pick up on certain tics. And I don't know that was so much a performance, But I mean,
fair enough. I think the Chris Pine comparison is a little different because that was an alternate version of the characters in like an alternate universe, whereas this is like the Captain Kirk, right? Like, and I realize that sounds a little silly, but I think I gave the Kelvin timeline movies a pass because
it's true. He gets a little wider berth because he's become a different person because of different things, of life-defining things happen. But jumping into the everyone else, I mean, as a broad view thing, and just as a fan of pop culture and as someone who is Generation X and getting older myself, I love that we have Anson Mount and Rebecca Romaine as our captain and our number 1, because they're both 49 years old. And Adrian Holmes, who plays April, he's 48. And it's so great to see a series start. And it was one of the great things about Next Gen when it started, right? Is people are like, wow, the captain's this like old Shakespearean actor. And it's crazy to think about Patrick Stewart being old at the start of Next Generation, but I remember that being part of like the press and the conversation around the show. And I love that, especially right now, obviously our culture is always very youth focused and so on and so forth. And to have a new show telling stories with younger versions of legacy characters and a prequel, and for them to have cast a bunch of principal characters in their late 40s, especially a female character like number 1, it's awesome. It's one of the many dozens of things to love about this show, is that they would put a 49-year-old actress in a lead in season 1 of a brand new show and not play the characters as they're not Danny Glover and Lethal Weapon. Like, they're just characters. They're just the captain and number 1. They're experienced, but it's not a big joke about them being over the hill all the time. I like Jess Bush as Nurse Chapel. I said this to Dave already. I'm a big fan of T'Pring in this show. I love everybody. The guy who plays the doctor, I don't want to butcher his name. It's Babs, something difficult to pronounce. But I actually first got to know him on I'm in the camp of people. I think the Daredevil series on Netflix is the best live action superhero thing we've gotten in decades. I'm also phenomenal.
I like Daredevil fan too. So.
And Daredevil is my favorite superhero, but it is my favorite superhero anything since The Crow, which also gets into a best in favorites because Daredevil the series is better than The Crow the movie, but The Crow's my favorite. But having said that, I bring that up because the Defenders series, which was the Avengers-like culmination of the Netflix shows, which a lot of people were underwhelmed by and didn't like, I personally liked it. Our guy who plays the Doctor in Stranger Worlds played one of the five fingers of the hand in the Defenders, and he was
I didn't put
awesome.
that together in my head.
Yeah, and it was just one of those performances. His body language, his presence, his facial expressions. There was just something really magnetic and charismatic about him in the Defenders, where it was one of those actors where I was like, I'm noticing this person. And then when he shows up as the Doctor in here, a very different character, it was also sort of like, and he has range, you know, to go from this like stoic villain to
and Mbenga
also
was
in Dune.
Yeah, that's right.
He's in Dune. Yeah, that's right.
But everyone's in Dune.
Well, and Mbenga is an important character to deepen because he was only in 2 episodes of the original series, and it was like, why is there this other random doctor that we know nothing about? And I think eventually we're gonna get a story as to why he's like, he lets McCoy take over and becomes the night shift doctor that we never see, right? But except for when there's like when he needs to slap a Vulcan, which, you know, is like the thing we all remember Mbenga for. But what's cool is for those of us who read Star Trek novels, there's been all kinds of Mbenga novels. So and one thing that's really neat too that this show is doing that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know, but since I'm friends with a lot of the authors who write Star Trek novels, is a lot of the things that they've written into Star Trek novels, Strange New Worlds has made canon. For example, it was a Star Trek novel that named number 1 Una. And Greg Cox, who's been on this podcast, he posted at one point an email exchange between 2 Star Trek authors where David Mack, the Star Trek author, named Una by basically saying, like, we can't just keep calling her number 1. She has to have a name. And Greg Cox says that because they were writing a trilogy and she was going to be a character in it. And then David Mack responds, how about Una? And then somebody else wrote back, ha ha, it's canon now. You know, that started with these Star Trek authors in a text thread. And that's kind of neat thing that they did, like respecting that, right? And it's a cool thing that they did on that. As far as the cast goes too, the other thing I would say, the last thing I would say about the cast for me is that I think in the end, like, they found a really good balance of, they had taken some legacy characters, but putting a few new characters in there. So there is some stakes for some of those characters in that degree. Do you have anything else on cast before we move on to favorite episodes?
I was going to say that is one thing about prequels, right? Is it seems like anyone who's a new character in any prequel is kind of a red shirt, because you go into it going, okay, well, I know, these 4 characters aren't going to, they're going to make it out of this movie or TV show alive. And then you're like, all these new characters probably aren't going to.
Melissa Nevins, who plays Ortegas, has joked on Twitter that she watches the show with a friend, and her friend keeps saying, you're gonna die, right? You're gonna die because you're the one
that was the last thing I was going to say about casting that I was saying earlier might be unpopular. I wasn't actually even just talking about the Kirk thing. I'm not a big fan of that character or that performance of Ortega's. It's not to say that it can't get better. It's not to say that it ruins anything for me. I love the show. I love the cast, but she is the most likely to pull me out of the show. There's just something a little too modern, a little too casual. Some of her dialogue and some of her scenes on the bridge. There's just, I feel like it's not quite dialed yet, that particular character. I think we can get there, but
I want to say that it always did bug me that the bridge chatting was a little bit too casual.
There's nothing military about it.
Yeah, right.
Right?
I don't like the
But then in the finale, when she's like, it's the Romulans, we've got to, we can't trust them, we got to attack them or whatever. And Pike is just like, stand down, in a very like, hey, we're friendly, but this is like this isn't a democracy kind of way. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah. The little sides and the like sarcasm. And I mean, imagine Picard putting up with that at the helm. Picard's, that's not, you're not going to be on Picard's bridge for more than an hour with their attitude.
Wasn't that moment like a direct reference though to Balance of Terror, when there's the guys like, I won't have bigotry on my bridge? Like
yeah,
she was
Shatner
supposed
does,
to be
yeah.
that character. And so, but yeah, I love Ortega's. I think that she kind of has the swagger of that you would expect of the pilot. And you know, and I every time I hear people say that Star Trek isn't, you know, doing enough sort of to follow military structure, I'm like, they never really have. I mean, the TOS was the most. I had to actually explain to my friend when I had him watch that episode. I was like, you have to understand, in the TOS era, everybody was really proud of, you know, what of, you know, these actors were literally in World War II, and so they were all very proud, and they sort of saw themselves as a hero. And it's sort of this very military structure thing. And I felt like I had to explain that to him. But I think that most of the other Star Treks, if not all of them, have lacked that to their benefit. That, you know, we don't actually need that, because it's a quasi military organization. Like there's structure and there is you know, court martials and stuff like that. But at the same time, all of the bridge crews have had a familial aspect to them. And so I totally buy the chatter going on at the comms, especially considering who Pike is. Pike is a very different captain than Picard, especially in the first couple of seasons of TNG. Obviously, Picard was much more humorless, and they were really trying to work that or make him, and then he kind of calms down and relaxes a bit, you know, a couple years seasons in. But Pike is really like the guy who's telling dad jokes at the dinner, and he has the entire, you know, bridge crew over for dinner all the time. So he's just like the guy telling dad jokes. I totally see that. I totally buy it.
Yeah,
That
well,
there would be
no,
some
his
casual
sarcasm,
stuff.
his sarcasm is important. In one of his first episodes of Discovery, there's a scene where he walks on the bridge and he says, "What shitstorm did we warp into now?" And I loved that. I loved that and I will say this is, you know, being a screenwriter, I you know, for my portfolio, I wrote A Strange New Worlds because why the hell not, right? And so I've had to think a lot about these characters to write them, even though I'm just doing it for my portfolio. But writing Pike, the dad joke thing or the sarcasm was really important. But I admit I had a hard time when I was writing with the idea that I know he uses first names on the bridge, and that just doesn't make sense to me. That and I, to go back to that, when I was doing my research I'm doing an article about Norman Spinrad's unwritten Star Trek episode. So I've been digging through the archives at Fullerton, and I literally read the 16 pages of notes that Gene Kuhn wrote Norman Spinrad on the Planet Eater episode that became Doomsday Machine. This is a little bit of inside baseball, but one of the first notes that Gene Kuhn gave Norman Spinrad when he wrote that classic episode was Spock would never call Kirk Jim on the bridge. Very specifically, one of the first
Glad they got
notes.
over that.
Yeah. But I mean, it was important to him at the time. So I don't know. I just think about that. That's just,
I mean, there's an element of Star Trek that is duty and honor and chain of command. And not to say, I feel like the human elements and the familial stuff is that much better because it seeps in through the cracks of what is otherwise a very, you know, people on a submarine who, you know, I tend to think of those starships as somewhere that everyone has a very important job. If they're not doing their job to perfection, it endangers everyone else. And that they're very serious about why they're out there and what they're doing, and that the moments of humor and lightheartedness or the casual banter between characters are just that moments. And I feel like it's not a criticism of the show overall. I think it's more just a couple of characters, particularly Ortega's. I feel like most of her scenes and her character interactions and her swagger, her attitude overall, have just been it's harder to suspend my disbelief, I suppose, during some of her scenes where
that reminds me. So one of the things that has sort of taken a little bit of pleasure away from this experience, because I love Strange New Worlds and I love it just as much as I love Discovery. I love it just as much as I love Picard. And, you know, they have different strengths. They all have different strengths, different weaknesses. But it has been stunning to me watching fans have a total double standard. Like so many of the things that Pike has done that they jizz themselves over, Burnham would have been crucified for. I mean, it is absolutely stunning to watch the, and we've known for years, we've seen, all of the toxic fandoms and the bottom feeders of YouTube complain about every little thing and just go completely overboard about Burnham. But like, the very first episode, Pike literally tells the Admiral, "You do not want me in command of your flagship right now. I'm a mess." And the Admiral's like, "It's fine." And and he's basically like, whatever. And then Pike proceeds to have approximately one dissociative episode per week while on duty, while in the captain's chair. He just zones out. And again, I love it. It's fine. But it's one of those things where if this had been a Black woman character, captain, people would be screaming, "Oh my God, she's not fit for duty. Oh my God, she shouldn't be captain," And like the way that they freaked out when they made Tilly captain, or Tilly first officer, acting first officer. And, so it's just kind of like, it's taken away some of the joy for me of being able to watch the show, because I'm watching the fandoms and I'm just waiting for them to hold that, the show to the same standards that they have been putting Discovery through. And, then like the same first episode, like Pike says, or Una is like, "La'an doesn't have clearance, the security clearance for this." And he says, "I don't give a damn." And then 5 seconds later, he's like, "Screw General Order 1. And I'm just like sitting there going, "Okay, guys, I'm waiting for you to complain about how you." So when you talk about like the militaristic, side of this, I'm like, even Pike, is really pushing those boundaries that you
and
would
that
think
was
would
Kirk,
be in
right?
place.
We only know about the Prime Directive because it was broken all the time in the 60s. Like that was like a defining thing of Kirk, right?
Well,
we have this big rule that I break all the time.
One last thing too about casting too is that I before we move on to favorite episodes, Robert April being a Black man was great. I don't care that in one episode of the cartoon he was a white dude, and I think it's hilarious. It was hilarious watching some of the fandom freak out about how it broke canon that one episode of the animated series. And plus, look, I love for animated series like to be canon just because that weird like all-terrain vehicle they had in the one hilarious episode, I want that to be canon. But and Spock's pet too, Spock's big giant pet, I want those things to be canon. But the fact that let's just cast Robert April with the new guy, it's fine, it's great. Plus it provided one of the best Easter eggs of the entire season. In the last episode, the picture of Robert April and Captain Pike that was in the frame where they're wearing the uniforms from the cage. Perfect. Most people missed it. It was a great Easter egg. Now, favorite episodes, starting with Sarah. Favorite episodes of the season. What were your high and lows for the season?
I feel like my favorite episode is also my least favorite episode.
You're not going to say the fairy tale episode, are you?
I'm going to say the fairy tale episode.
Oh, come on.
I mean, I loved the idea of it. And, it was really funny because I totally cried. And then I was like, if this were Discovery, people would be screaming that we only got to see this little girl. We only got to know this little girl for like 2 weeks. And then they wrote her out. And, and like, I found it a little unbelievable that Mbega would, that he would give up his daughter so easily over something that could have been a trap. It could have been, like there wasn't really enough parental, like, wait a minute, I want to make sure that this alien, Nebula character isn't hostile in some way or going to drain you for energy or something like that. Like, what's going on? And then the actual costumed characters or, scenes themselves, I don't think were that strong. They were just kind of like so in love with the camp of it. They just kind of almost didn't really care what they were saying or doing in those scenes. In my humble opinion, it was still fun to watch. And I think part of it is that I think that we didn't know the characters well enough to have an episode like that yet. It would have been more fun, I think, to have that episode, either be the penultimate episode of the season, because I realized that it probably couldn't have been the season finale, or have been in season 2. It would have been a lot more fun to watch the characters behave that way. But I don't think, it was
couldn't
my
have been
favorite.
more original series though to have an episode that ridiculous.
It couldn't have been.
But wait, but Sarah, why
Every
was it your favorite episode?
because it was at the same time really adorable and really heartfelt, and the actors did a good job with what they had. I did notice that it was kind of nice to have, as much as like people have been tweeting about this and stuff and saying, well, of course this is the most Star Trek thing that has ever occurred. At the same time, it's nice that they actually had a budget for those costumes, so the costumes are actually really nice, whereas the ones in like TNG really look like high school stage productions. So even in the 80s it was just like, which made it even campier.
As somebody who's read the notes from the 60s to the writers, I've seen literal notes now from Gene Roddenberry saying, well, we have a castle we can use, so why don't we put them in a castle? Like, I've literally seen that note. Like, I could share screen and show it to you, actually, probably. But it's funny that the difference in that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, the nature of those. That for me, the Easter egg though, that the book he was reading was written by Benny Russell, from the Cisco science fiction writer character from Deep Space Nine. Like that almost made the whole episode worth it. And then I saw some people complain, well, Benny Russell was a serious science fiction writer, he wouldn't write a fairy tale novel. And it's like, have you heard of Ursula Le Guin? Because she wrote Earthsea and The Dispossessed. Shut up. So, so are there any other episodes, Sarah, that you really want to comment on that were, I mean, I want to get you beyond the fairy tale if you want.
Well, I saw a lot of the episodes in that way, right? Like I loved the pilot, but I hated the way that T'Pring looked like Ariana Grande or something. Like she was just totally not believable to me as a Vulcan.
I love Ariana Grande, so that might explain a lot. Sorry, go on.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, it just made her look kind of infantilized, and I think that there is absolutely nothing Vulcan about women wearing all that makeup. I mean, makeup is a very much an Earth thing, and when I complained about this on Twitter, some guy was like, well, it's logical that women would want to attract mates even on Vulcan. And I'm like, no, you're thinking in a very male Earth centric, take off your paradigm hat and imagine what it would actually be like to be on Vulcan. This would never work. It's totally destroys the believability of the Vulcans in Strange New Worlds. But anyway, back to the point. Each episode kind of has, the thing about episodic storytelling, and the reason for me why it's like no better or no worse than Discovery of Picard, is that the flaws are more noticeable when it's a short story. Like the whole pirate episode was resolved by waving a magic wand. They just made up some shit and then they were out of the sticky situation, things like that. There's just a lot of things that in each episode that were things that I didn't like, but at the same time, I still liked each episode. So I'm that way about a lot of Star Trek.
So
look at that.
By the way, this is the letter
from Gene Roddenberry.
This is the letter from Gene Roddenberry to Norman Spinrad, and you can see here, like he literally starts talking about. We have a somewhat Polynesian character, and maybe we have, and he starts, it's really bad. He starts talking about all the sets that he can use. And I believe he mentions the castle. I had to be a nerd out and show everybody that. So, but anyways, so yeah, I see what you're saying about the Vulcans, like, and I think there's a balance there, and I was fine with it. It didn't bother me like it did you, but I certainly understand where you're coming from on that. So, Issa, favorite episodes?
So, in a lot of ways, it all kind of ran together for me. I feel like all the episodes were great, except for the fairy tale episode, which I thought was one of the worst 45 minutes of television I've ever seen in my life. And we can talk about that if we want to.
Whoa.
But yeah, I really didn't
Harsh.
like it. Well, I have my reasons, but I think if I had to pick a favorite episode, and honestly, like I said, they all kind of run together as they were all excellent. The one where the 3 Gorn ships are chasing them through the black hole area.
Episode 4.
Episode 4, as I was going to say, was probably my favorite. I really liked, it was everything I like in Star Trek. It was a tense situation without a lot of action. That's just like pew pew. They had to like think their way out of a situation, and it was kind of cool. So I would say that was probably my favorite. I feel like I have to talk about the fairy tale one. As a parent, I just thought it was ridiculous that he was like, yeah, okay, take my daughter. They took what was a nice story and just compressed it. And it should have, the daughter and the transporter buffer could have gone on for a while. They've been doing like the various like searching for the cure kind of things. I think that should have been something they resolved in like season 3 or something. Like there was just no reason to rush it.
I actually don't think they should have resolved it. I think that would explain why he's letting McCoy run the show.
Like, yeah, there you go.
You know what I'm saying? That's what I thought they were doing with that. I expected the daughter to be there forever.
That would actually be cool. I just thought it was very rushed. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And the actual, that part was just like whatever, because that was you didn't really find that out till the end of the episode. The characters, so there are certain like rules when characters play other characters. There are a lot of famous examples on different TV shows where the cast will lose their memory in a situation or something similar will happen. And there was nothing, it was just random. Like it didn't really, you have to sort of find, like the episode that jumps in my head obviously is the Buffy Tabula Rasa episode where they all lose their memories from a spell, and Spike thinks he's Giles's son, and like, all sorts of hijinks ensue. It wouldn't have been entertaining at all in season 1 when you didn't really know the characters, and so, Pike might have done a great job of playing this like, scared, cowardly court person, but it wasn't interesting at all. And I found it extremely boring. And same with all the characters. There was nothing, like, I had no reason to see La'an acting silly as dressed as like some other character. Like it didn't add anything, I thought.
The question wasn't least favorite episode, Issa.
I know.
Well, I will say this. I'm going to defend the fairy tale episode in this regard. There is nothing more TOS than sitting down and watching a hilariously bad episode that makes you go, wow, how did that get greenlit? How did that happen?
We're in universe.
Everything he could. I mean, that's what was so TOS about it.
I thought it was very next gen also, because I always asked the in universe question: how, after the first holodeck mishap, is there still a holodeck? Let alone after the 100th time that something went wrong on the holodeck. It's just such a lazy story device to like, it's a holodeck episode. How many times did they go in there to live out some fantasy tale and everything just went fine? It was normal. Nothing went wrong. No one got
Nobody
trapped.
ever thinks to update the security
it's like
protocol.
The anthropic principle. We don't see those stories because they're not interesting, So you only see the stories where something goes horribly wrong. Otherwise it'd be a boring show.
We do need the once upon a time on a day like any other to get to our,
right.
inciting.
But to answer the question without just ragging on the fairy tale episode, I thought that all the episodes were quite strong. If at some point we're going to talk about the Gorn, I have some comments there, but I'll save that for later.
Yeah, we can talk about that. And I will say that they did, even though I didn't like the fairy tale episode, the comedy episode with the body swap was great.
Oh yeah,
The
that
fact
was
that
really
they
good.
did a
That was
comedy
well.
episode, because I mean we were used to Ferengi episodes on DS9 like all the time. It was like
Yeah.
every 4 episodes we got a comedy episode. So
But
and
that
Star
worked because
Trek
it was
hadn't done
actually funny, and you knew the characters well enough for it to actually work. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
like sometimes it's the only logical conclusion is hijinks or whatever. That was a great line.
yeah. Well, and you know what's funny too about T'Pring is that there are certain phrases that she uses on the show, like saying the hijinks, and she refers to gallivanting. My wife uses hijinks and gallivanting against me all the time. And so, like, both times, because she's never watched a Star Trek with me, but she'll be in the room. Both times, like, when she said gallivanting, she was like, because she accuses me of gallivanting all the time. So, so that was kind of funny for me that just a little inside thing. But so you did like the comedy episode though?
I did. I liked every episode except for the
fairy tale. Ryan, what were your favorite episodes?
Well, that was a great segue, because another thing that T'Pring says in that 5th episode is "parted from me and never parted." That
Right.
greeting that those two have. And okay, so Dave rightly predicted that I was going to love Memento Mori, which was episode 4, which you guys just talked about. And I did. I liked every episode. I liked the fairy tale episode for a lot of the same reasons that Sarah and Dave pointed out. I understand why one may not like that episode, but I enjoyed it. But my absolute favorite episode, surprisingly, because the comedic episodes aren't usually my favorites, but episode 5 was my favorite. And it's because it did a few things. One was, yeah, we were deep enough into the season, and it had enough stakes and seriousness and tone that we could have a fun episode. I have a huge soft spot for the body swap genre of accidental, unintentional body swaps from the 80s of, Kirk Cameron and Fred Savage and Judge Reinhold, and it's a whole mini genre. So I love that we had a body swap episode. I love that the body swap also included a gender swap, which is fun, especially when it's 2 Vulcans. I love that episode gave us not 1, not 2, but 4 different versions of Spock, because in the dream sequence we get a fully human Spock, which I believe is the first time we've seen without pointy ears. Full human Spock. I'm sure someone listening to this will correct me if there was somewhere in canon where that's happened.
Well, in the other episode where they were breaking into the prison planet, or the prison on that planet, and his holo, they got the shot.
Oh, the holo, yeah. But this was like, he was a fully human Spock. It was real, air quotes. But yeah, we got fully human Spock, fully Vulcan Spock, regular Spock.
The original fight scene music from the.
Yeah, there were so many great musical cues that were in that episode that were familiar but new. And and also to finish my 4 Spocks, we also got Spock in T'Pring's body. It was, fan service is something that gets talked about in every fandom, usually in a, derogatory, dismissive sort of way. And I think that true fan service, when at its worst, is when it is there purely to go, oh, look, you remember this thing? You like that? But I think that when it's earned, is a different story. And then I would add a third instance of fan service, which is when it's Easter eggs that are truly Easter eggs that are really inconsequential to the main story, where a casual viewer can watch it, not pick up on that thing, and it's not taking anything away from their experience that they didn't notice that. And I thought that this episode, from the title of the episode on through to, this is one where I made notes about it because I liked it so much. So many little Easter eggs and callbacks. We were talking about the animated series and whether or not it's canon. This episode gave us a reference to Spock's pet, which is mentioned, but is only seen, I think, in the animated series. We got Pike and the green sort of wraparound tunic thing, the variation that, of course, Kirk wore in the original series.
Wait, Downey, should I admit that I know that his pet's name is Kaya?
Thank you. Kaya, Spock's pet. So I'm right that the pet's in we only see it in the animated series, right?
Yes, the pet is only in the animated series. Yep.
I liked the Enterprise bingo. I just sort of still, I mean, any episode that's really, this is the opportunity. You know, we were talking about the military setting, too much, too little. This is like
Oh, wait. I have to correct. The pet was mentioned in Journey to Babel.
Yeah, mentioned, but not seen.
But not seen. Only seen in the animated series. Yes.
Enterprise bingo was fantastic. That was
this is your classic shore leave episode, right? Like, and that's, those are always fun because those are opportunities to see characters in a different light, to see them relax, to see different characters interacting with one another that you might not be used to seeing interacting with each other or in quite the same way. You know, seeing the doctor going off and going fishing, which, you know, I would prefer would be some sort of holodeck fishing as opposed to actual fishing. But, you know, that's a nitpick. There's a lot of eggs getting broken in Star Trek these days and animals being hunted and things I don't generally approve of. But I think the introduction of the idea that everyone's fighting over money again is probably the worst. But anyway, I digress. That's my favorite episode 5.
Yeah,
fun episode.
Also on the thing of the Enterprise bingo was great. Enterprise bingo was great. It was like such a human thing. And in the penultimate episode when Spock has to buy the new lieutenant a drink because he calls him ensign, and he says, "Is there no end to your human drinking games?" And it's like such a great. He's so annoyed. It's so great.
And I love in the Enterprise bingo also we get that really great. You know, I'm not a big like, oh, this visual effects shot, it's so amazing. I've just never really been one of those people. I prefer editing. You know, I always think that the better stuff is the stuff you don't necessarily notice because it's done so well and so seamlessly. But I did really enjoy. I mean, who doesn't love the idea of two characters standing on top of the Enterprise while it's in space? Right. You know what I mean? Just being like, just standing on top of the Enterprise and writing my name on something. Like that might have been my favorite scene in that episode even.
Yeah, and the idea that there's a plate on the deck that a bunch of people have signed.
Yeah, that was a really nice touch.
Well, and I think the other thing that's doing as a prequel is it's adding weight to the Enterprise itself, because every once in a while I think to myself, this is the same ship that Kirk is going to sacrifice in Star Trek 3 to save Spock. And you know, I just have that thought sometimes every once in a while. It got retrofitted and all that, but it's the same ship, and I think that's meaningful. Yeah, for me, top episodes, obviously, episode 4. First of all, Balance of Terror is my favorite all-time Star Trek. Okay, and the thing that I'm going to admit to is that I wrote my first attempt at my Strange New Worlds spec when all we knew were character names, and then I went back and rewrote it once I learned the characters. But I had always wanted something that was submarine battle-y, and they did it twice. And not only I thought that they did Balance of Terror very well in episode 4, and then little did I know they were literally going to remake Balance of Terror, which is fantastic. So obviously those two are. But for me, the spaceship, well, I mean, Wrath of Khan's my favorite for that reason too. The spaceship strategy, the submarine strategy thing, which all goes back to, by the way, Balance of Terror is just a remake of a 1957 movie called The Enemy Below. And if you go back and watch The Enemy Below, when people say like, oh, Star Trek just remade Alien in that penultimate episode, I mean, literally, Balance of Terror has lines of dialogue straight up.
Aliens.
Yeah, aliens. Yeah. Well, they straight up, like, The Enemy Below has like the whole storyline with the two commanders, and they're plotting with each other, and then they're one of them has to save the other one at the end, and he says, "In another world, we could have been friends." Like literally in that movie from 1957, it's exactly the same. And you know. Whatever. Anyways, but the Memento Mori, it's like Balance of Terror with a horror movie with that's scary. And I rewatched it yesterday, and it's the 4th time I've watched it, and it still works. And also the fact that Ethan Peck, if you want to fall more in love with Ethan Peck than you already are, in the Ready Room interview, he's talking about the scene where he has a really emotional scene with Pike. And he says, well, yeah, it's good to have a scene like that, so you're not just always talking about gravitational redshift. And the fact that he was referring to, with the exact science behind the Pike maneuver in that interview when he's already filmed a whole nother season of Strange New Worlds, I thought that was impressive. The science actually makes sense within a Star Trek context. And the fact that they had an escape that wasn't a nebula, that was a black hole. And probably my favorite Spock moment and the whole thing is when Pike says, you're right, Enterprise has to go deeper. And Spock turns around scared out of his mind and says that was not a suggestion. Is absolutely one of my favorite moments of the season. It's great. It's a great Spock moment because it's a different Spock, because he still has the ability to be terrified. Because I think if Kirk said that in the future, he may have turned around and said, I do not suggest that we do that, Captain, but I don't think he would have been freaked out. And that shows the difference, that shows growth. And that's the thing. A nitpick that I have is as much as, and we're going to get to this, the other favorite episode, of course, the horror episode with the Gorn, and we'll talk about that. Hemmer was one of my favorite characters on the new show. I did not like losing Hemmer. I did not like the context of it. It was, I think that they let him give up a little too easy.
Yeah, is there some backstory here that you guys know about that I'm not aware of? Like, did the actor have another job or something? Like, why in the world did they kill one of the best characters for no apparent reason?
Maybe he hated the makeup. He was like, this is itchy. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
I
maybe.
guess I had the same thought. I was like, there has to be some other explanation to this.
They told him his arc from the beginning. They had that planned.
But why? Like we've got Stranger Things where they, you couldn't kill someone if you wanted to, and then you've got this where they kill a character.
I think they wanted stakes. They wanted us to know that some of the characters on the side that we, and they wanted to have real stakes and I think his role and Uhura, and I love that Uhura called them, what did she call it? A Hemner, or whatever. She combined their names in some really great way. It was great. And
man, and that funeral was so painful to the other two red shirts who died. It's like,
yeah, they didn't talk about that.
Talk about this one guy that died and never mention the two people.
Well, you knew those.
Gotta love that tradition.
It was his first away team mission too, and
totally.
That's real fan service.
Yeah.
Dismissively forgetting about red shirts.
Well, and the Hemmer thing was hard, and not just because I wrote him in my script that I wrote for my Strange New World, but I'm gonna leave him there because it's just a writing sample anyways. And but the thing with Hemner, I keep saying his name wrong, Hemmer, is that I think it was interesting to have a character who was, I know he's not directly Andorian, he's from the offshoot species, but he's from Andoria. And the Enar, like, being pacifists created an interesting thing. And again, that's the character that's a species who was just kind of tangentially in Enterprise. So to give them a character, that was cool. But I also liked that the relationship that Spock, I wish they had more time with Spock and Hemmer, because like the one scene that they had, I mean, who doesn't love Spock throwing carrots? It's just great. So, all right. So I think we've gone through favorite episodes. Let me, I closed my notes, which was a bad idea. So let's talk about some of the Easter eggs and things. Oh, I got to talk about the pirate episode. I love the pirate episode too. But the stones on this writing team to put Cybok as a, as a cliffhanger at the end. I'm surprised we didn't get another Cybok episode at the end of this season, but I'm sure we're going to get more Cybok next season. But the fact that that movie and that character was so hated to like make me actually be excited that they showed Cybok. I literally pumped my fist when I watched that episode that morning, because I was like, yes, they did it. Partially because, and this is kind of an inside thing for me, Greg Cox, who's a Star Trek writer, from the minute they introduced that Burnham was Spock's sister, he was jokingly posting on Facebook, like, you know, bring Cybok back, you cowards. And like he would constantly say, bring Cybok back, you cowards. It was jokingly. And so when it happened, I was like, they did it. They did it.
My first reaction to that episode cliffhanger was I think I wrote to David and said, oh crap, does this mean I have to rewatch Star Trek 5 now?
Right. No, you don't. You don't have to.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
Yeah. But you know that the original idea was to cast Sean Connery as Cybok.
I did not know that.
How hilarious would that have been? He would have been suddenly Scottish for no reason, and like, you know, whatever. Anyways, okay, so funny. Let's see, I think we got most of the Easter eggs. Where do you think we go from here? I've had people ask us, do you think that there's enough to carry on a couple seasons? And of course there are. Spock served with Pike for 11 years. We're halfway through that. We've got 5 years. Who's to say a season doesn't necessarily represent each of those years? So we can get all kinds of stories. We have 5 years of the Enterprise going around. And it's clear that, you know, it can take a beating and go to the space dock and get rehabbed. I think there's plenty we can go from here. Where do you guys want to see season 2 go? We know it's already in the can filming wise, and they're doing post-production now, starting with Sarah.
I hope they try to make the Una subplot a little more believable. I did not believe it at all that she would be sent to a penal colony for 7 years just for lying, when Starfleet has a history of forgiving, you know, fairly major infractions by well-decorated officers, especially if it works out for them in the end. And the fact that she had made it as far as she did to be, you know, as decorated as she was and as loved as she was, and then, you know, have us believe they would do that. Like, she would be kicked out of Starfleet for sure, just kicked out. But a penal colony? No, I don't think so. I don't buy that in a million years. And so I'm very interested to see how they handle that in season 2, and, you know, hopefully it involves it. Also, like, I also didn't buy that you know, the alternate history version of La'an would just be like, oh yeah, no, of course I haven't talked to her. Like, she would have left Starfleet. Like, you know, they made this big deal out of this relationship that Una and La'an have, and then we're supposed to believe that La'an just lets this happen and doesn't really sour towards Starfleet, that they sent this really wonderful, caring, really good Starfleet officer to a penal colony for lying about something that is, for very sympathetic reasons, she would lie about. And, oh, by the way, she's also among the last of her kind. And we're supposed to believe that Starfleet is going to not be at all sympathetic about that. And we're supposed to believe that characters wouldn't, you know, have, you know, automatically fought for her. And you know, there was also another little moment of Pike at the end there, where he almost creates a physical altercation, where he like puts his hand on her shoulder, and that, like, and everybody's just like, okay, sure, that's fine. He gets a pass for that.
He bent the security guy's arms back in like a lock of some sort, you know, like that was like, yeah.
Like, yeah. I require a little bit more consistency than that.
And we all know that sometimes you just get bounced back from admiral to captain because people like calling you captain.
Yeah.
Right. Well, in the beta canon, she became a captain. Now, what that means, nothing. But yeah, I would like to see that story. Well, we're definitely going to see that probably the first episode start to play out. But remember with La'an, she hates genetic engineering because of her connection to like her family name, and like basically it would be like if you had a ancestor who was a Nazi and you go way overboard I mean, you obviously hate Nazis, but it's, you know, she's like, I think she was trying to distance herself. So I think she might not forgive Una for that. That might be what they're setting up with there.
I think they're going to deal with it in the next
Yeah.
season. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I hope that they do deal with it. It's just asking a bit much of us, you know, to create that relationship. Because if anyone, you know, if she could see past those prejudices in anyone, it would be in her friendship with Una.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I also, just to amplify, there's no way Pike lets people come on board his ship and arrest his first officer for this. Like, that just didn't feel right at all. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's the exact same cliffhanger ending to a season that Lower Decks had, by the way.
He's done with that girlfriend, though. You know that they're never gonna bang again after that.
Yeah, the other captain. Yeah. That might be a problem. But yeah, I really but it is the same ending as Lower Decks, because Lower Decks, they take the captain away. I can't remember what her crime was, but she did something. So yeah, that's kind of interesting too. And but as far as where I'd like to see them go, I'd like to see I mean, obviously I love the Spock centric storylines. I Cybok running around with a, you know, non-binary pirate is, man, what's going on with Sarek's family? Like, Sarek's family is a hot mess. You know, for a guy who's an ambassador, he's got an adopted daughter who's a secret. Now he's got, I don't know. Anyways, Sarek, I mean, hey, get your freak on, Sarek. I'm cool with it. Like, you know, it is the 23rd century, right? So, but here's the thing, as far as going forward, I would like to see that Cybok storyline do more. I would like, and I'm trusting these writers to do, you know, cool storylines. I would like to see the Klingons, the aftermath of the Klingon War. I would like to see that a little bit.
Wait, aren't we before the Klingon War or whatever? Like,
I think
No.
we're after, because didn't
We're after,
Spock
yeah.
reference it at one point?
Yeah.
huh? Okay, because
Because the Enterprise missed it. Now, I just read the novel, the beta canon novel that explains where Enterprise was, and it's that's called the Discovery War. It's actually really good, but and it explains that they basically were on a mission and the ship got captured and they had to fight back for it, and that lasted like 6-7 months. And they missed
I thought the Federation of the Klingons were actively at war during the original series. Am I just remembering that wrong?
No, it's a Cold War. It's a Cold War.
Again.
Yeah. And I mean, they're in the aftermath of the main Klingon War. So there should be some tensions there. My main thing is more episodes like episode 4 that make space a real thing. I've said this many times. I want Star Trek to actually be in space, where they take space seriously, and the amount of time it takes to get places and things. I just want more of that. That's all I want. But I mean, we could also talk about where we want Star Trek to go in general, because this is the first time in 30 weeks where there is not a new episode of Star Trek. So that's, you know, an unusual state for us nerds right now. And I think we're going to get another Star Wars series before we get another Star Trek, which is Andor. But yeah, so that's where I wanted to go. Issa, where do you want Strange New Worlds to go?
So I guess the plot that I am most interested in is the Gorn and what they're going to do with that. I feel like they're sort of, you know, whatever, you know, I'll just talk about Next Generation had the Borg, you know, and they're sort of setting up the Gorn as the Borg of Strange New Worlds, in the sense that they're this like super powerful, we are no match for them alien race, which I sort of get annoyed by, because they haven't really at least so far, they haven't convinced me that that's believable. Like the reason Aliens. I mean, this was, and I really love. Someone is a huge James Cameron fan on that show. They had the whole Terminator 2 thing. Maybe fate is what we make of it, or whatever line in one of the earlier episodes, and then they also had. They basically remade Aliens complete with like little girl who had survived the whatever, and I thought that was really nice.
And George Kirk being Bill Paxton. Basically.
Yeah, totally. Game over, man. Exactly.
Yeah, he basically was the game over, man. God.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, I thought that was cool, but it's just, okay, fine. The Gorn can avoid, at a certain level, a non-technological species just shouldn't be scary. I'm not going to be scared of being attacked by lions if I have, a whole bunch of guns or whatever. Right?
Yeah, but the Gorn are a technological species. You just saw their babies.
No, I understand, but it was the threat is a little unrealistic.
I'm on a thread with a bunch of that's mostly Star Trek writers and us super nerds, and there was a whole argument about whether the Gorn developed technology or whether they stole their technology, and that it is more, and everyone agrees it is more likely that the Gorn were like hunted by a technological species and took them over and stole their technology.
No, and fair enough. But like the threat of the Borg, where
to get really nerdy on you,
I'm going to get even nerdier. The threat of
the first time ever.
First time ever.
Both of us. Yeah. But the Borg being a technologically superior species with better technology, that makes it believable that they're scary. The reason that Aliens worked so well in terms of believing that animals, basically could fight these like well-armed Marines was there was a nuclear reactor that was going to explode if they used heavy weapons. They couldn't use any heavy weaponry, and they were taken by surprise. And the alien blood was acid and all this stuff. They just weren't prepared. They had really bad leadership, and they had a traitor amongst them. That's why it worked, right? So Star Trek people with all their Star Trek tech shouldn't be scared of any non-technological threat. Like it's just not realistic at all that a wild animal or whatever, even if it's very clever, is going to be a threat.
All the technology in the world can't stop a hurricane, for example.
Well, that's not true at all. A deflector shield can stop a hurricane.
I'm just saying that there's certain things. I think the primal nature of the Gorn, it works for me. I'm fine with that.
I'll give you some suspension of disbelief, but I found it a little ridiculous that these little tiny Gorn babies were like just taking people out like they're freaking Ant-Man or something. Like do they have super strength? Like what's the deal there? Like that. Like how are the little babies able to drag that woman across the floor and all that stuff? Like I didn't get that.
I also, in my head canon, the Gorn that Kirk fought in Arena is a senior citizen Gorn.
Totally.
That's my head canon.
Yeah. He's their elder. He was their ultimate leader. They sent the elder of the species.
He's the 230-year-old Gorn who's like,
totally.
He's like a Viking that wants to die in battle.
Right. Exactly. No, I don't mind that part, but it's just like, again, you're not scared of like, whatever the scariest thing would be with no technological weapons if you have a phaser. It's just not. It's not very believable.
Downey, where do you want to see Strange New Worlds go?
I would love a few things. One of the things that I love about episodic storytelling, and that Star Trek has always been great about, Buffy the Vampire Slayer was very great about, X-Files, was very like definitive here, where it's, you get your mythology episodes, you get your standalone episodes. I would like to see that continue. I think there's a lot of opportunity for great standalone episodes, and I would like to see character focused standalone stuff where it's like, okay, this episode is going to be about this character. The A story is going to be this character, and it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end that's going to wrap up by the end of this episode. And pepper out some other stuff that has the connective tissue for whatever the season's trying to do. But I'd like to see more of those kind of episodes. I'm curious, from a super dorky fan servicey area, we did hear a Scottish accent coming out of engineering, and with our engineer heroically self-sacrificing or whatever, get rid of the alien babies. Are we going to get Mr. Scott? Is he going to be is this going to, and not to say that I want to see the show gradually introduce every single character from TOS, but it'd be fun to get a Scotty.
We're definitely getting a Scotty. I don't know how they avoid that at this point.
If we are,
hopefully it'll be a really Scottish person.
Right? No more Scottish erasure.
Yeah, they've hinted that they want to do Scotty at some point, but I've always thought Scotty came with Kirk, my personal opinion. But and we know McCoy did, so we're not getting McCoy.
And look, and this show has a way. One thing that both delighted and annoyed me simultaneously about TNG was the original setup was like, this is a flash forward. It's way far in the future from everything we've known. And then they already cheated right away by going, here's a 1,000-year-old DeForest Kelly. Like, McCoy is somehow still alive. And I was like, all right, one guy. And it's like, no. Vulcans have longer lifespans. Here's Spock, and he looks the same. But it was like eventually, okay, Scotty's been trapped in the transport. Like, it was like they eventually, and this show has a much better opportunity in that because it's a prequel, it can much more believably, it doesn't have to contrive so hard to introduce, of course, we're not necessarily going to get actors from the original series, but to get,
that's
characters.
One of those I can't argue with, but I loved all of those when they
that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, it was each time they did it was so stupid, and it was always stupider than the time before, right? And it was like awesome. you can grant them one, and then it's like, okay, two, but then they just kept doing it. Yeah. But I would like to see more character driven standalone stories, and if Kirk is going to be a reoccurring presence in season 2, it would be fun to see the Kirk Spock relationship and its early beginnings, and to see kind of how they play with that. And
and I have to ding the show for one thing that I almost forgot, which is the episode with there's an episode with the planet with the kid who sacrifices himself. Okay, that is that is 100% a ripoff of an Ursula K. Le Guin story that's a spinoff of The Dispossessed. I'm brain farting the name of the short story.
How dare you forget that?
I know.
It's like the most inside baseball reference ever.
It's like children of something. Down. Isn't it children of something or other?
I'm totally brain farting the name of the story. But anyways, it's one of her most famous stories, which is the funny
you're in the layer of Inception right now where it's just ultra slow motion.
Yeah.
7 layers into this reference.
Anyways, it was so much like that story that I was sitting there like with my eyes, like at first I was like, oh, this is a great homage to Ursula Le Guin. And then I thought about it, and I saw many writers say she deserves story by credit on that. And there is precedent for that in Star Trek. Frederick Brown was a pulp sci-fi writer from the 40s who wrote a story that's almost exactly the same as Arena.
Don't forget about Harlan and Terminator.
Well, right.
Got his name on there.
Right. And Frederick Brown, that got a story credit on Arena because one of the producers told Gene Kuhn, like, hey, this is a great script, but it's exactly like a story I read in the 40s in a pulp magazine. And they literally bought the rights to that story and gave Frederick Brown credit. And they really deserve to give a nod to Le Guin's estate for that story, because the whole story is the exact same setup with the one kid that sacrifices himself to maintain the whole thing. I mean, there was no Captain Pike having a relationship with the lady or whatever. So they Star Trekized it, but the concept was literally the Ursula Le Guin story. And
the ones who walk away from Omelas.
Yes. Yep, that's the one.
I can't believe you couldn't remember that off the top.
Yeah.
Of your head. Jeez.
Offensive.
I know. I'm getting post-backed science fiction wise, but as we would say in Indiana, Ryan, that was a fairly trust move on my part, not knowing.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Unbelievable. But yeah, so the Le Guin story does deserve credit there, and that was kind of a thing. Like, I would like to see now, and this may sound self-serving as a science fiction writer, but in one of the things the original series did that Roddenberry did was that he took the cage out to science fiction conventions and showed it before, it was a thing. He took a black and white, like I wrote a thing about the number of the authors who wrote Foundation, Dune, Stand on Zanzibar. They all sat in the same audience together and watched Star Trek together for the first time in Cleveland, which is really mind blowing, right?
Yeah, I think Dwid was there.
Yeah, Dwid definitely was not there, but good reference though. But so in Clevo, they had this convention, and Gene Roddenberry went out and gave cards to a bunch of science fiction writers who were there, who ended up writing episodes. Harlan Ellison, Norman Spinrad, science fiction authors who didn't get episodes made but wrote treatments. Robert Sheckley, A.E. Von Vogt, like all these classics. And, and that's one of the things I'm researching soon is all those treatments are at the UCLA archive. And eventually I'm going to read them all. But here's the thing. What's cool is that Roddenberry, because he'd learned from Rod Serling, who hired Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont and George Clayton Johnson for the Twilight Zone, he'd hired all those guys for the Twilight Zone. I would like to see Strange New Worlds, and they only have 10 episodes, but you could do this in beta canon by hiring like serious, real big name science fiction writers to write side books or episodes or collaborate on ideas to get Strange New Worlds to be even more science fiction, because when it went really science fiction with episode 4, I was super into it. So I'd like to see that. Oh, and another...
Is it possible to grab some of those unmade treatments and adapt them into episodes of current Trek shows, especially the ones that take place in that timeline?
Of course you could if you went... Ryan, I've got ideas, but
chin stroke.
Yes, yeah. So there's those archives are there, and some of them are that we know things about them. Like the A.E. Von Vogt wanted to do one where Spock got turned into a giant, and they just told him like, no, we don't have the budget to do that.
Right.
but Philip Jose Farmer is another famous science fiction writer who wrote 3 treatments for episodes that didn't get made, and it's really cool. Oh, and that reminds me too, another Easter egg deep dive reference. The season finale episode for Strange New Worlds, A Quality of Mercy, is the same title as a season 3 episode of The Twilight Zone that starred a young Leonard Nimoy. So
which
a
Twilight Zone episode is that? I don't remember it.
It's the one with the pilots that there's the Japanese pilots, and they're on the same island, the paratroopers, and I'm not going to go fully into it. You should go back and watch it.
I will.
But it has the exact same title as the season finale of Strange New Worlds, Quality of Mercy, and Leonard Nimoy was in it, and playing a soldier. But so that's another. So I'll make up for my Ursula Le Guin thing by referencing that Twilight Zone. And it was funny too, because I remembered the episode once I looked it up, but when I put in the title into IMDb, that the Twilight Zone one came up, and I was like, holy shit, I remember that one. That's Leonard Nimoy was in that one. George Takei was, of course, famously in 1, 2, and Shatner obviously in 2. So a lot of those.
Yeah, Takei was in that episode. God, I forget what it's called, but it's amazing. Yeah, where he's
and Shatner, by the way, used to hang out at a bar with the Twilight Zone writers, like that, because they were all into fast cars and weird shit. So they would drive cars with Shatner, which is like a really weird, funny thing. That awesome. And when my research for an article I did on Twilight Zone writers, they talked about this bar they hung out at with Shatner. And we know for a fact that Rod Serling was the inspiration for Roddenberry, telling Roddenberry, you should go to science fiction conventions, you should hire science fiction writers, you should do that. That's a really smart move. And I just wish modern Trek would do that. There's plenty of TV writers. And that was the problem with the modern Twilight Zone that Jordan Peele did, is he hired a bunch of TV writers instead of genre writers. And what you need short story genre writers to do the Twilight Zone. You need it. You
If
can't
only
do
we
it.
if only we knew at least one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, now. So, all right. On that fun note, I could go on that all day. So let's wrap up a little bit. We talked about where we wanted to go with things, but how about well, let's talk, Sarah, how people can find you, what kind of stuff you do online, and then where you want to see the entire Star Trek universe go. Like, what would you like to see Star Trek do with, like, pitch me a series that we need that we don't already have, since we have so many series.
I've always been I'm totally interested in the Star Trek 90210 that we will get eventually, the the one about Starfleet Academy that we will absolutely get. And I just hope that it's more along the lines of the current vein of quality rather than something that looks like the CW put out. And because that's totally a possibility, and that is one of the ones that is supposed to be in the pipeline. We were supposed to get a Michelle Yeoh standalone series. I don't know what happened to that. It was a great idea. Everybody loves Michelle Yeoh. What the fuck? I've been waiting for that for years.
Everything everywhere all at once doing so awesome is not helping.
Yeah. Well, and it is and it isn't, but anyway,
it's making her more expensive. Yeah.
Well, it's making her more expensive, but it also is making her sort of more like, I've started to think of her as like a science fiction actress.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I thought of her as like, I saw her first time with like everybody else when she did Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And, I thought of her in that vein. And so now I sort of think of her as a science fiction person. So anyway, hopefully that'll happen.
Have you ever seen The Heroic Trio with Michelle Yeoh, Sarah?
Nope.
I'm assigning you The Heroic Trio.
Send me a link. I'll forget. I'll totally forget the name of that.
It's her 1993 Hong Kong female superhero team up movie. And it's incredible. I'm
sold. I'm already sold. I'm there.
Yeah. And the villain has a flying guillotine. So
well, there you go. That's fantastic. Also, I would just like to complain about the fact that we could have had an Australian Nurse Chapel. We don't have enough Australians in Star Trek. We don't have enough Kiwis in Star Trek either. And
yeah, we had Chris Hemsworth for 5 seconds.
For 5 seconds, exactly. And so it's one of those things where like they clearly gave her an American accent so that she'd be more like our Chapel. And it's like, come on, that's totally one of the things that you could have changed without anybody getting like, I do worry sometimes that Strange New Worlds is sort of trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator of fan, because you will never please those people anyway. The people who want everything to be exactly the same, you're not going to please those people. So why bother? And so when I saw her interviewed, I was like pissed that we did not get an Australian Nurse Chapel, because that would have been cool as hell. But anyway, that's a total, pet peeve of mine that I have an issue with.
Well, she wasn't Australian in the original series, so I get it. But
that's what I'm saying, though. Like, why? Why does it matter? There's nothing to her character that matters that she was an American.
I think they felt that they were already worried that she was too attractive, and they felt the accent would just push it over the top. That's my theory.
That's true. She does do weird things to my Kinsey scale.
Well, by the way, her best look was the goggles in the second to last episode. I'm surprised. I expect to see a lot of cosplay of Nurse Chapel landing party with goggles. But Issa. Oh wait, Sarah, where can people find you?
Probably Facebook. I'm on Twitter for probably 2 minutes per day. I exist there, but it's like tumbleweeds. So I spend more time on Facebook.
All right. And we discovered each other through Star Trek shit posting, which is, of course, which I unfortunately introduced to Issa's life as well. So now
I'm enjoying it.
I have a love-hate relationship with it. It's a great place and it's a horrible place at the same time. Anything can happen at any moment.
It's very hard to keep up with, and it makes me feel very old. And
I made a meme I made an original meme, okay, and they put it on post approval. I posted it as OC. They always say if you want your content to be like mark it as OC if it's OC because it has more of a chance of getting posted. So I marked it as OC. I made it, and then because while I was waiting, while it was in post approval, I posted it on my wall and I posted it on Twitter. And somebody who was a mutual friend took it from my wall and posted it to Star Trek ship posting, and they approved her post right away. And then they told me, "Oh no, only originals." And I was like, "Oh my god, I made that."
See, and I'm just sitting here finally realizing that OC that everyone parentheses everywhere is
original content.
See, now
and you thought it was Orange County this whole time.
I was like, yeah, why are they all in Orange County? What's up with that? You know,
that's the ultimate Starfleet Academy TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that's like the OC.
Totally.
All right. Yeah, Sarah, thank you for your point of view. I always enjoy it. You didn't have to do as much defending this time, you know. The Picard season 2 episode was a lot of you trying to convince Issa and I to not hate it. And
I didn't hate it. That's strong. I don't want to. Don't put words.
You know what? I like season 2 of Picard less the more I think of it.
Fair enough. I would just say I haven't really spent much time thinking about it. But
yeah, every time I think about it, I'm like, especially Strange New Worlds right after it, it's like made it worse for me because I was like, oh my gosh, what a failed opportunity. But that's just, I don't want to digress there. We did a whole episode on that.
I thought
Sarah
about the
did a
Rise of
wonderful
Skywalker
job
for like two months, so I get it. when you keep realizing new layers of how terrible something was.
I just like it more the more time goes on. So
well, I'm glad. I actually am really glad that people like that. When I complain about Lower Decks, for example, one of the things that I tell people all the time is I'm super stoked for people who love it. Unlike, I can't stand the people that don't like Last Jedi who refuse to let us Last Jedi fans enjoy it. They just like, you're supposed to dislike it. Like, no, I'm super cool with you liking what I don't like. It's fine.
You're Star Warsing wrong.
I'm Star Warsing wrong. Yeah. Issa, pitch me a Star Trek show, and where can people find you?
All right, you can find me. You can find me on Facebook, but you don't want to. I'll just yell at you about veganism, complain about the government, and do other boring stuff like that. You don't want anything to do with that. So, what do I want in a Star Trek show? Honestly, I just want a well-written, good story. Strange New Worlds is that, and give me more. I wish that the other series had been as good as Strange New Worlds. I understand that's a high bar, but it just, one of the things that Strange New Worlds did was really point out or make obvious how much Discovery had failed and how much Picard could have been better. And
you're just wounding me over here.
I know, I'm so sorry, Sarah. I
love Discovery too, especially the first.
And don't get me wrong, I like those shows fine. I enjoyed Picard a lot. I really enjoyed some of Discovery a lot, but the last couple seasons of Discovery, I felt like I'm just watching it because it's Star Trek. I like Star Trek, and it's like if I watch it or not doesn't really matter. Strange New Worlds, I was actually excited for every episode, and I really enjoyed watching the episodes, except for
But it has all the same flaws as Discovery.
No,
That's the thing.
No way. It's so much more solidly done. Like it's not. I don't think they're comparable. Like one is definitely way better than the other, even though they're very similar, obviously. As
Strange New Worlds is full of plot holes. It's full of characters suddenly deciding to talk about their trauma, and I love it, don't get me wrong, but every criticism that people have leveled against Discovery is present in Strange New Worlds, every single one.
I'm just going to disagree. I think Strange New Worlds, when they had serious the bridge crew family stuff, worked really well, and when they had serious things to do, they did it serious things. They didn't be like on Discovery, be like, we've got 10 seconds till all of the universe is destroyed. Let's have this conversation in whispers right now.
10 seconds, MacGruber.
Exactly. So season 2 of Discovery, which I thought was the high point, was fantastic. And it just, again, like David said with Last Jedi, I'm stoked that everyone likes any of the new Star Trek shows. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone else's enjoyment, but I personally enjoyed Strange New Worlds about 10 times as much as I've enjoyed the
only issue I have, or the only thing that I think I like Discovery, but it has too many characters, and that's one of the flaws that I think Strange New Worlds showed, is that Discovery has way too many tangential characters and too much going on. They have too many people to deal with, I think, as part of this is one of the issues they have. Now, I love Discovery. I wear my Discovery hat all the time. I represent for Discovery. I think season 2 was their high bar, but
just to go back to advertising
is my least favorite season. Season 2 is my least favorite season of Discovery,
really?
Because it's basically the Captain Pike show.
Exactly why it's great.
I mean, if all you want from your Star Trek is a charming white male captain, why even bother watching new shows? Why not just watch the originals over and over again?
I appreciate where that criticism comes from, but I love Michael Burnham. I think Michael Burnham is the good thing about Discovery.
I don't have a problem with Michael Burnham.
What is bad about Discovery? It's not even bad. Bad is too strong a word. When we did if just to advertise David's former old podcast, I made an Excel sheet about how many main characters each Star Trek series had for that last one, and Discovery just had too many characters, and it was like significantly more characters than other shows. So
yeah,
but even that, there's just as many characters in Strange New Worlds. You just don't notice them because it's episodic. You never see them after the episode that they're in.
I also think, I don't want to restart the whole podcast, but I think there's too much made about whether the show is episodic or not. It's not really episodic in the sense of, like a sitcom or something. Like, they are definitely telling some like longer story arcs in these episodes.
Issa, pitch me a new Star Trek show. Where do you want to go? If they hire you.
Geez, I'm totally failing on the spot here. I feel like there are, I would like to see something that's more, I would like to see Voyager done better, if that is a fair thing to say. But like the idea
that's called
like,
Prodigy.
Prodigy is sort of Voyager done better, but yeah, a little different. But no, the idea of like a ship that's really on its own and has to find their way home. I realize that is exactly the plot of Voyager, but there was so much about Voyager that didn't quite work for me that like a more serious version would be pretty cool. Aside from that, I'd like to see more movies. I really think Star Trek works really well in movie format, and I would very much like to see more movies of the shows that we have, or different things, but that would be very cool.
Oh, a Strange New Worlds movie. Ooh.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go real quickly to let Downey go last. Obviously, if you're here on my podcast, you should know how to find me. But the thing that I would like to see, and I say this all the time, I've said it before, I want a show set in the same era as Picard in the post-Romulan debacle, with a investigative reporter, Jake Sisko, serving on a ship full of like reporters like outside of Starfleet. I think it's time we had a non-Starfleet show set in Star Trek. And I think the way you do it, where they're constantly trekking and going through space, is if they're a team of investigative journalists going around the galaxy investigating stories and then end up in adventures. And you have the perfect character there with the character who was learning to be a journalist, and Jake Sisko brings Sarah Lofton back. And then you got a Sisko in the show. Boom. That's what I would do. So Downey.
Love it. We're going to be somewhat similar in that my pitch for a Star Trek show is also something non-Starfleet. You can find me at ryanjdowney.com, on Instagram at ryanjdowney_, and on Twitter at Ryan Downey. And I would say,
and Speak and Destroy.
You can find all that in all the above places. I would say something I've always wanted to see, and this is maybe it's too, there's so much Trek right now that maybe we could finally have something like this. I'd like to see something that is set on a specific planet and dealing with that particular civilization. Vulcan would be a great place. I could see something that's Klingon oriented, but I'd like to take one of these great alien races from the lore and just spend a whole show with them. You know, interpolitics and workings and daily life, and you know, there could be occasional interactions with the broader Federation of Planets, but that you're really just anchored in this one place and dealing with this one society, as opposed to gallivanting around, meeting new people and places all the time.
House of Cards on Vulcan. Why not?
Yeah, I think right. I think it'd be interesting to see even how much Trek can sustain something like that, like a real deep dive into just one culture, one planet.
That's really interesting. My complaint about Deep Space Nine when it started was that I didn't like
it's a fixed location, right? But by being the kind of location it was a place where lots of people were coming and going all the time. And I think even a place that doesn't have the constant travel back and forth, it's just you're just hanging out with a bunch of Vulcans.
A beta canon novel that I would suggest to you, Una McCormick, who's really, she used to teach science fiction in England, but she wrote, it's funny because I had one of the funniest tweets ever with her the other day. She's obsessed with Garrick. Garrick's her favorite character. And I tweeted something about Garrick being a great character, and she replied within 5 minutes. And I said, Una, you are like, if you say Garrick 3 times in a mirror, you appear. But she wrote a novel about Cardassia post Dominion War, with Garrick returning to try and rebuild the government, that is really inspired by The Dispossessed, the Ursula Le Guin novel. And
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's like super underrated for how great of a just science fiction novel it is, that just happens to be in Star Trek with Garrick. And I've felt that like people don't I need to reread it, and I want to write a big article about how people don't realize how brilliant this media tie-in thing was. And she's done she did the autobiography of Catherine Janeway, and she did the Picard prequel.
Indiana's own Captain Janeway.
Yep, that's right. Shout out to the statue in Bloomington.
Can't go 2 hours without mentioning that.
I almost got through. I almost made it without mentioning it. Downey did it first, but he's a Hoosier too. But yeah, I would say, Ryan, she kind of does something similar to that with that book. Cool. You would really appreciate it. But yeah, that sounds cool, Ryan. I dig it. I dig everybody's ideas. Like, it's great. I want more Trek. So 30 weeks in a row is not enough with the new Star Trek. We need to keep it going. So on that note, does anyone have any final statements they want to say? Speak now, forever hold your peace. This is your time to talk about Strange New Worlds. I think we're good. We talked for a long time. All right.
Kenobi really annoyed me.
No one did?
It annoyed the shit out of me. God, I was so annoyed by it. It was so stupid.
Yeah, it happens.
I thought it was pretty entertaining-ish. It was my favorite of the Star Wars shows, for sure.
Wow. More than Mando?
Mando's fine, but I didn't really care. Like, it wasn't super interesting. It was like the only thing that was really interesting about the show was that there was the baby Yoda. It was fine. It wasn't bad. I wasn't like
I've liked all of the shows, although certain caveats about each, of course.
Oh,
I thought Boba Fett was.
No, that's a separate episode.
Yeah. Okay.
Kenobi.
I think we can all agree that the Scooter Gang was stupid. I don't know. It'd be hard to find someone to defend them.
Ryan, I think you and I need to get together and screen the final couple seasons of Vampire Diaries.
That's a podcast.
Wow. On that note,
I thought we stopped recording. I'm sorry.
All right.
It was my understanding that the recording was off at this point. So.
All right, the recording is going off. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.